Thanks for joining us tonight. Voters in Wisconsin continue to endure long waits at voter locations throughout the state on the third day of in-person absentee balloting. Many left wondering what circumstances are creating this high turnout that differs from the last election. And First Alert Update, Drew Best spoke with a political expert about the high early voter turnout.
Early voting numbers in 2020 skyrocketed as Americans voted amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Those numbers seem to be rising once again. Political expert and professor at Lawrence University, Gerald Poder, says almost 500,000 Wisconsinites have already cast their vote, either through early in-person voting or mail-in ballots. He tells us the high absentee voter turnout stems from Republicans making a stronger push for early voting.
4 years ago, they were encouraged by their own candidate, Donald Trump, not to participate, which I think was a mistake. This year, the Republicans are not making that mistake.
Poder believes the high turnout bodes well for Republicans, but it does not necessarily mean more votes are swinging to Republicans this election. He says many voters have already made up their mind on who they are voting for.
I have very rarely seen in any presidential election the amount of polarization and visceral dislike and anger directed at a particular candidate.
The high voter turnout is also creating delays in label printing during in-person absentee voting. Voters in Appleton tell us they were shocked by the long waits.
The lines are crazy. I think that it's going to possibly be no problem on November 5th.
We were aware of the fact there were lines. I guess this is a little longer than we anticipated. An hour pushes it, but we'll wait an hour.
The Wisconsin Elections Commission issuing a statement Thursday. It reads in part, quote, "The delays have only affected label printing times. Every other function of the system that clerks use to print is working optimally," and, quote, "No voters should be turned away due to label printing delays," end quote. The WEC says the new label printing system that has added time to the early voting process is not required to cast an absentee vote, but it adds to the efficiency for local election officials. I'm Drew Best for Action 2 News.